You're really welcome to the Deal Final Corner. So, this is your weekly property talk show brought to you by Property Filter, hosted by myself, Guillaume Black. I'm your favorite Frenchman, the CEO and co-founder at Property Filter. It's the UK's highest rated platform to find deals. And we're on a mission to empower our property investor and deal sourcer members to find, get 1,000 deals this year, thanks to the Property Filter blueprint. And the purpose with those Deal Finder Corner is really to give you the, more and give you the best of the available resources by inviting expert guests who will share with you the latest and most current strategies, tactics, and secrets about what works right now in terms of finding and making deals and the reality of systemizing and running a high-performance business in property. It really is my pleasure to introduce you today to Richard Nicholls. So Richard is an HMO valuation expert, an HMO sales expert, and is done well over 750 HMO sales and completed on all of these sales. He's got a very personal and personable approach where he travels to all of these HMOs doing, literally seeing dozens of HMOs each and every week up and down the country, wherever they are. He really is one, if not the leading commentator and the expert in this field, all to do with HMO value and HMO sales. So most of his content is based around providing advice for existing and aspiring landlords who are looking to invest in more HMOs or optimize their current portfolio for ongoing ownerships, or indeed looking at the exit, because these are, at the end of the day, we talk about all these tired landlords, but we're all going to be tired landlords one day, and we want to have the better exit for our portfolio. So, and a bit of, he's got a national expertise really, but I've got a note here saying about how he's appraised and sold many HMOs in Derby. And he's got a very deep understanding on the local market there, especially at the moment with the incoming Article 4 area and the abundance of new developed units, and I know a lot of people who are quite successful in Derby. So what can we expect today? So I'm going to talk about HMO values, sales, how you can make them more saleable, and how do you exit actually your portfolio and your HMOs. We're going to talk about properly understanding the landlord's sales value, and there are different sales numbers you can think about. And we're going to look at the key variables that affects the HMO value and why it's important to understand on these if you're ever looking to sell. And I guess what I'm saying is that we're all looking to sell at some point. So very much looking forward to hearing Richard today, and very, very pleased to have him today and listen to his talk. So please give a massive virtual Property Filter welcome to Mr. Richard Nicholls. Over to you, mate.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, nice to be here. So yeah, that was quite a good introduction, actually, Graham. So I appreciate that. Yeah, so the main focus where I actually earn the money through the business is completing on sales transactions. We get paid on completion at the end. But specializing in HMOs for many years, gradually I started to realize, I don't know, 6-7 years ago, that we don't just want HMOs coming in from landlords that have never heard of us, that just come in and say, oh, can you sell our HMO tomorrow? And they've been running and optimizing a HMO portfolio for X amount of years, and then they come to us. And what we usually find at that point is there are just the same common things not there, or the landlord wasn't really thinking about, during that time frame, how to actually prepare and optimize the HMO for sale. And as I've kind of progressed it's better for me, because obviously if any of you do ultimately decide to sell down the line, or anybody that I speak to, 3 years time you come to me, at least your property is going to be more saleable and better prepared, so I can find a buyer at a better price for you. But in the short term, most of the content that I do is just completely aimed at the same, whether you are thinking about buying a HMO, or you're looking at appraising them, whether you own them, whether you're still purchasing, or whether you may be a couple of years away from exiting. The same things that go into creating a HMO's value for that ultimate sale, they're linked with optimizing it, making it more compliant, making it more systemized. So they're good to know for appraisals coming in, for developments, for GDVs, but they're also very helpful for existing landlords that just aren't even thinking about selling. So most of this talk is gonna follow a flow of kind of, as Graham said, the variables and the things that we look at when we value HMOs. And there's a little thread of a case study that we take through and look at a case study of just an average HMO and see how those various variables affect that property's value as we progress. And be mindful, if you don't own HMOs currently, if you're using Property Filter to sort of, find your next deals, and you're looking at maybe doing a renovation and development project, what we're going to go through, you can apply even at that stage, thinking, okay, well, what's the realities of the running costs, or what is potentially maybe a surveyor going to be looking at for the end value, and what are the key things I need to get in place to hit my refinance level that I'm looking at to make the deal stack, or take that back one step further. Probably what we're going to go through today could also help raising JV angel investment, because the clearer, better understanding that you've got of HMO GDVs, not just sale prices, but HMO values, and then with a theme of saleability and on optimization as well. It helps from every angle, with no matter who you are, with your appraisals, with your management and ownership, or with your ultimate exit. So that's what we're going to cover, and I'll try and pause a couple of times just so I can be notified if there's any questions, or if we're going too fast. But I'm only on a laptop without a double screen, so when I click screen share, I won't be able to see the questions pop up. So I'll talk. I won't be able to see you, so I'll talk and talk and talk, and try and remember to pause every so often, so we can catch up. So this is me, Richard Nicholls, obviously HMO sales expert. The QR, I'm not big on pushing the thing. There's nothing to sell or talk about, but the QR code there just links through to my blog and contact details and things like that. So take a screen grab either now or at the end, because it pops up twice. So don't worry about, and you can always message and follow up as well. But there isn't any sort of downloads or sales pictures as we go through. So let's make sure that I can move page. So first of all, for those that don't know me, a little bit of kind of background in this property sense. So yeah, I qualified as an estate agent in the early 2000s, and the good thing when I came into property was it was almost. I mean, my estate agency that I went straight into didn't have Rightmove. I think it was out when I started, but it was within its first 6 months or year, and every property that we sold was still somebody coming into the branch, sitting down at the desk that I was sat at, and you talk about property. And that's my first 3, 4, 5 years in property, where it was very much a sales job. It was a personal job. It was face to face, and I'm glad of the time that I've been in property, because I see even myself trying to recruit people and recruit staff over the years, and dealing with estate agents. Properties turned into a bit more of a kind of dumbed down marketing job. If you're trying to bought properties through estate agents, you'll agree that the skill level in the industry over probably 2010s onwards, you're dealing with kind of mobile phone sales people, and phone sales and recruitment agents that just switch between estate agency and recruitment and things, and it's very much a different industry now. So I was glad of when I came in. I think the skills and and actually making the effort and meeting people and going to every HMO, that was just built into my DNA from that time. And you get such a clearer national picture as a result of that. So sold my first HMO in Chester around that time. I can remember going into it and not really knowing what HMOs were, and gradually got a little bit intrigued. So as everyone is, deal sourcing, doing deals, all the different strategies around kind of 28, 29, 2010, those kind of times. And then gradually, I'd say very consistently, late 2017, 18, specialised in building a proper HMO sales advice and sales agency. The business was the Property Advantage, and we grew. We visited and valued thousands nationwide from that period. I mean, I will think at the peak going to visit probably 1,000 properties a year, something like that. It was fairly high volume. That resulted in over 750 completed transactions, and they are just. We were talking just off before recording then that even the last 2 weeks I've been to Newcastle, Doncaster, Buxton, Derby, Portsmouth, Worthing, London, so everywhere. And if I don't go to these places, then it's really difficult I'll just be pigeonholed understanding one type of HMO, one area. And then, just this year alone, we're well over the 300 mark now. I put this together a couple of months ago and tweaked it for you to talk. So, so that's a little bit of a background about me and specialisms that I've kind of decided to really niche into something, and hopefully comes across. So the subject of today is basically how to calculate the value HMO. But with that sentence underneath being the most important thing, why this is important to you. And that's why when I said at the beginning about, this isn't for landlords, this isn't a pitch for landlords to suddenly decide to sell. This is a pitch to sort of try and change the way people think about the industry. Because if you look at all the HMO training, all of the platforms, the gurus, the conversations online, the video content that you can absorb, everything's about, well, where can I find the deals? How can I appraise those deals? How can I execute the build? How can I get to the point of refinance? Who are the lenders, all the mortgage advisors and the brokers are giving out good advice. And then there's a little bit of chat about running those properties and optimizing them, managing them, a little bit of chitter chatter in the groups about that and about being at the networking circles. There is an echo chamber when it comes to actually talking about, well, how do you sell a tenanted HMO? At what point do you choose to sell? How do you optimize the sale? And how do you avoid selling like the 50% of people that come to me that choose to sell for the wrong reasons or bring a property to me that isn't ready to be sold? So I very much see my role in the industry as being the person that, is the go-to guy to give advice on that kind of, there's no point buying a property well through Property Filter, developing it well through a trusted developer, running it brilliantly with a great managing agent. If at the end of that, you just throw all that cash that you've built and all those profits away and undersell it and sell it to a buyer that doesn't appreciate what you've got, or sell it in a way that it isn't going to get an optimized sale price. So that little bit at the end is where I come in, but it's important to you, whoever you are along the process. Before I go into the kind of the variables and the things that change value, I just wanted to, I'll be mentioning gross yields quite a lot. I wanted to double check that everybody knew and understood what I was talking about. You'll notice I don't often talk about net. I will cover net, but I don't talk about ROIs and ROCEs and things because they're very personal to yourself and to the way you're financing it, the way your costs of running it, your own individual costs, your circumstances, whatever it is. It's very difficult on a presentation to actually boil down into ROIs and nets. But as a rule of thumb, every time we value a HMO, we arrive at a gross yield, which is simply the gross rental income divided by the value of that HMO times 100. So that will chuck out percentage, and you're probably familiar seeing those percentages, but it's just clear. It's just important for me to point out that is, it's a broad brush. It gives us that first sort of, filtering process where we could look at it and say, okay, well, 12% or 6%, that 12 is higher than 6, and that gives in theory a higher return. But it's just one way of establishing the returns that a HMO can provide. And then underneath the gross yields, there's a hell of a lot of things to take into consideration. But having taken all those things into consideration, you still arrive at, you've got a gross rental income and you've got a value, whether that's a refinance value, whether that's a GDV value that you're looking at as a developer, or whether that's a sale value that I'm achieving for you with a new buyer. So you will end up with a gross yield no matter what on each property. So what variables come into play when determining the value of a HMO? So what I wanted to do is just tick off the starting point, so the basics. So if I was quickly appraising, so I've had, for example, 3 come in today, they filled in the sales form. And as a rule of thumb, I just quickly appraise them, scan them before I go into a deep dive. This is the sort of stuff that you're looking at any property, any HMO that comes in. So, you've got your bricks and mortar value. Hopefully everyone understands the difference between a kind of bricks and mortar, what it's worth as an asset. And then, as we'll talk about a bit later, you've got values that can rise above that, commercially derived or income-based valuations. HMO sales valuations sometimes can go above a bricks and mortar. But as a starting point, the baseline of everything that I look at, what is it worth just as a house, or what was it worth just as a house, or what will it be worth just as a house? So that's really important for us. The size and the beds, I put size stroke beds because obviously you've got square meterage, sort of the sheer size of a property, and then you've also got the number of bedrooms. Leading into the planning class use, because, you know, we'll talk about it in detail in a second, but planning class use, obviously C3, C4, sui generis, all the different variables within that, depending on what lease type are in the property. Have a factor initially, so I look at it and say, okay, I know it's that planning class use, so I know its value is capped at X. The revenue, so just the income that it's producing, total income, that's why I called it revenue, you know, condition. And then I've always got, which is what most people find interesting. I'd imagine the Q&A at the end will be focusing on this. There's a local or regional yield expectation. So the country is split up, and there are certain yields that you can achieve in certain parts of the country, and there's certain yields that you should expect to achieve as a seller or gain as a buyer. So that's my kind of initial broad right. So going a little bit in depth into the bricks and mortar. So as I said, so it's the baseline for all of my valuations, the starting point. The reason for this, I've put north versus south there, a couple of bullet points down. You know, if I'm appraising a property and the landlord says, well, I'm looking for 400,000 for the property, and I quickly go on to some of these platforms that can look out, you know, a bricks and mortar valuation like Home Track, or I use Sprit, or I use sometimes Rightmove comps for just residential properties. And if that is a 100k terraced house, average on the street, but I know the landlord is having conversations around wanting to try and achieve 400 grand, then I somehow have to make up 300 grand's worth of value. So already I'm thinking, right, this HMO has got to have a hell of a number of USPs to achieve, you know, 2 or 3 times the baseline bricks and mortar. And we can go into how we achieve those USPs. And then conversely from that, in the south, you know, I might look at a property in Balham in central London, which is a 1.25 million pound terraced house, regardless of tenancies, regardless of anything in there. So I know that is my extreme baseline. I'm not really needing to do much else after that, because it's very unlikely that the income from the sort of the yield-based income valuation is going to rise anywhere near above that. So yeah, it's a very good starting point for my valuations, and it establishes the likely buyer type and their motivation. So you do tend to get buyers that will buy higher yielding, not too concerned about the bricks and mortar with the capital appreciation. They'll go higher yield and they'll buy for cash flow, and they'll typically go to Midlands and further north. And then at the same time, if you've got a sort of slightly lower yield property in the south, but you expect it to be linked to the bricks and mortar value with full appreciation opportunities, then it freshens off the gross yield, and it's a different type of buyer, potentially with different motivations and different budgets. So that's kind of the starting point. And the other thing with bricks and mortar is the lender concern. So obviously a lender will get a bit of a nosebleed if, as I said previously, it's 3 times, we're asking for a GDV of 3 times what the average house along the street is, unless it's ticking certain criteria, which we'll try and cover as we progress. And then, you know, I'm looking at, for those type of properties, if next door is 100k HMO, 100k buy-to-let property, for example, and we're next door at a 300 grand valued HMO, I'm looking at the value add as well. So I'm thinking, right, well, I know the developers spent 150 on this. So they've bought for 100, they've spent 150 because they've done a loft and extension, and they've done several en suites. So you're at 250 before you need to worry. So that is really critical for me to understand. So the starting point is really what's next door worth in some cases, or what was it worth prior, just as a house. And you can also include what would it be worth if all the tenants disappeared tomorrow. So the size and the beds. So, you know, you've got tenant trends and desirability. So depending on how large it is, some tenants like larger co-living properties, some tenants prefer smaller properties. And the local trends and the local tenant habits come into play. Lender support again. So for me, as a valuer looking at sales purposes and advising landlords, we're always conscious of, well, I might be able to sell it at 300, but would lender back it at 300? And, you know, you will probably be familiar, which we'll talk about on the next slide, about the different lender sort of the lender support for, it's different for if you've got a 5-bed, 2-bath HMO, you're likely just to get a bricks and mortar finance or something tiny bit above, but it's not going to be income based. And if you go 6-bed all en suite, or if you go over 7 people, then the lender support changes and how they value that property. So that simple way of assessing that is the number of people that are living in there, and the size of the property. And going on to the previous point on the bricks and mortar, the conversion costs. So, if it is heavily adapted and heavily converted, then obviously there's a conversion cost as sheer the money that's gone into it, but there's also a difficulty factor in terms of you buying a C3 property through Property Filter, and then managing to execute a build locally, project managing and delivering a project. Yesterday, I spoke to the last countless of people that were as an overseas investor that tried to do a development and tried to work and operate HMO conversion, but couldn't execute it on time or budget because they were too far away and they couldn't handle the builders and they couldn't handle the conversion. So yeah, the difficulty factor of converting HMOs of certain sizes definitely comes into my initial sort of broad brush. The income amount. So what I look at is you tend to get a feel for the average sort of what would be the average room rate in that area. And if you're appraising, this is good for if you're appraising sort of finished HMOs on Rightmove or any of my ones that I've got, or any of properties that you see that are finished. If you just divide the gross income by the number of paying bedrooms, and if that is about on the average of what you'd expect, say, £500 a month or £600 a month, it works out. So you've got 30 grand's worth of income divided by the 6 beds divided by 12, whatever that monthly rate comes out at. Quite often, tenants don't lie. What they're paying and what actual the bums on seats are paying in that HMO will tell you an awful lot on a kind of broad brush initial appraisal. The condition, the quality, how well it's run. Because if it's under rented, you tend to find that there's issues coming in later on, which we'll talk about. And if it's 150 quid a month higher than the average on spare room, then we probably know that it's a all singing, all dancing boutique HMO, providing that the tenants are paying and they're happy. We know that condition is going to be fairly high. So on this initial appraisal, when I'm just running, just kind of on a, I wouldn't say back of a fag packet, but this is my opening gambit with every HMO. If dividing the gross income by the beds by 12 really does, it's a great acid test. And then the other thing just on the bedrooms is the economies of scale. So you've got a 50 quid Wi-Fi, Virgin Wi-Fi on 4-bed, you've got a 50 quid Virgin Wi-Fi on an 8-bed. So pro rata, it's half the price. But you've got 4 more paying rooms. Same applies with gas, water. You do get economies of scale, which, as we'll talk about and we touched on previously, that can help net returns. Economies of scale helps actually, back pocket. Therefore, do I add value? Do I increase the value for a better performing with better economies of scale, or do I reduce value if it's only a 3 or 4 bed? And then pro rata, all of these costs are quite expensive per bedroom. So yeah, that's a kind of a very simple way initially of looking at the value. We've talked a little bit about it, but planning class use. Double checking first of all that there are various inclinations within the C4 and what have you, but to keep it quite simple with what we're talking about, you've got C3, which is your residential properties, single family tenants or families living in there, related people. You could go into that C4 HMO planning class use. I know that it's not a commercial planning class, it's still a residential. The top end of that, so the 6-bed all en suite, you can start to get kind of the hybridy Shawbrook lending, which does help, and they're more popular. You've got larger properties, of course, but it's still held within that no more than 6 persons. And then you kick over that line into the sui generis, which going through that planning permission in most cases requires, there's soundproofing, there's better insulation, there's fire building regs, fire safety. So you do get a natural jump up in kind of sustainability, longevity, again, economies of scale. You might have a sort of more long-standing tenants because the rooms might be bigger, they might have better amenities, there might be whole commercial buildings that are kind of converted. So, again, the planning class use that the property falls within will give me a great steer. The caveat to all that is it correctly in place? And you can quite quickly work out from a landlord if you're appraising ready-made HMOs, or if you're going into this yourself. Licensing isn't planning and planning isn't licensing. So it's the number of people that dictates the planning. So if you've created a 6-bedroom HMO, there will be lots of people here going, oh, this is the 50th time I've heard this year. So we, don't teach us to suck eggs, but there's always 5-10% of landlords that I meet that come to me and say, right, I've got a 6-bed HMO. There's 2 doubles living, 2 couples living in there. So there's 8 people, but it's all right because my license says I can have up to 8 people. Have you got sui generis planning permission? No, I don't need it because the license has given me, and it's a fallacy. The planning and the licensing are 2 different things, and the planning is linked to the people that live in that property. So it only adds value if it's correctly in place. And then obviously we're looking at the different types of lending available in accordance with the different type of planning class use that property falls within. Revenue. So obviously, quite quickly, I can look at it and say, all right, well, that's quite high. I think we touched on it before, but the average room rate versus the normal in that area. So that's my first broad brush approach. And then, as we've said, it's a platform to work from. So you've got your top, what it would be if it was always full. So your fully occupied monthly amount times by 12, your annual gross income. And then, as we go through these slides, really what we're doing is we're peeling that back and working out, well, what does it deduct to and net back to? And, and if we hit certain levels, then obviously the value will be dictated by that. This is fairly standard, doesn't necessarily, it's not HMO specific, but the condition, I suppose I always ask the year that property was converted, as well as what HMO landlords are quite good at doing is sending me the pictures from when it was first developed. So I get all these amazing photographs, and then I say, well, when was it converted? Oh, 2019. So I think, okay, so it's a 5-year-old HMO with kitchenettes in, with 7 or 8 tenants living in there for 5 years. I know not to expect it to look exactly like the pictures when I'm going in, because really, I think with HMOs, it's almost like a dog life rather than a human life. If you put a new kitchen into your family home, you'll get 20 years out of it. If you put a new kitchen into a HMO, you'll get 5 years out of it, kind of thing, if it's not well looked after. Just because there's that many people working working and living in it and using the amenities. And then obviously we're working through structure, maintenance issues, wear and tear, and potential future outlay as well. Is it going to be an add value of HMO? So therefore, we've got to put that margin in. And condition, you can't really get that without visiting the property. That's where I differ. A lot of kind of HMO sales agents that operate in the UK nationally very rarely go to the properties. And I think for myself, you walk in, as soon as you go into the hallway, you can tell straight away whether it's been well managed, whether it's been looked after, and you start looking at these maintenance issues as problems. And then all we're doing is drifting the gross yield a little bit higher than it should be. And then finally, on that kind of initial broad brush, and I'll pause if you want to photograph this. There are properties that fall outside of these bands. So if somebody's screaming at the screen now, going, "Well, I've got a HMO in the West Midlands that I've sold at 9%," that you do get anomalies and you do get exceptional circumstances that go either side of this. But as an absolute broad brush, if I know I get a property in, so I'll tell you the property that's coming this afternoon. I've had 2, I think it was 2 or 3 today. So the 2 that are coming this afternoon, one of them is in Worthing on the south coast, and the other one is in Fleetwood in the northwest. So I know for the Worthing one, it's definitely going to fall within 7 to 11%, and I know for the Fylde Coast property up near Blackpool, it's definitely going to fall within the 10 to 15. But knowing Blackpool and the Fylde Coast as I do, it may just slightly creep over that top bracket. Knowing Worthing as I do, it would comfortably fall probably in the 10-ish, in that region, around the 10s on the south coast there at the moment in this market. So I'm starting to collate that data. I'm always changing it. I'm always evolving it, but it's etched in my brain. Everywhere I go around the country, you've got these sort of, the broad brush approach of, well, this is what it should be if everything is correct. And then all we're doing is the margin for error is we're just sliding that property that I'm appraising, or you're looking at PDVs, and surveyors and valuers are appraising. They're within that sliding scale. So what I would say on that is, if you're looking at a property on Rightmove, and you see HMO in the northeast, and you live in, Tootlebury-on-Thames down in the south, and you want to invest in a high yielding HMO in the northeast, and it's available for 25% gross yield, you've got an absolute stinker, because the higher the gross yield isn't always, the better the returns. It's obviously, it's a headache scale as much as anything. So, the lower the gross yield, the lower the interest rate, lower the returns that you're going to get on your money, obviously, usually the lower the risk. So there's more moving parts and more variables and more risks the higher you go up, usually, depending on your knowledge and where you're comfortable on that sliding scale. So, and then conversely, if you see something in the northeast at 12% gross yield, well, that's going to have to be one hell of a HMO offering something pretty special. Caveats to this is student properties. So student properties tend to track a little bit lower than most, because you've got very localized markets that, Newcastle being an example, needs anywhere that's got sort of fairly high gross yields. As a rule of thumb, decent gross yields available for normal HMOs, working professionals. You take the student equivalent in that city, and you are 4 or 5% lower, sub 10% for most student properties, because they're very different, and they attract different buyers, and they attract a different sort of tenant type. So yeah, has everybody, what I'm going to do at this point is just quickly pause. Is everybody okay? I can see questions popping up, which I think we'll do a Q&A at the end, if that's all right. But are we all right to carry on?
Yeah, all good. Yeah, all good, Richie.
All good. Lovely. Everybody photograph that. If you want a sort of copy of these slides afterwards, just let me know. But that's normally quite a popular one. So let's apply what we've just sort of gone through in terms of an actual case study. So let's assume that we've got a property in Doncaster. It's just come into me, or you're appraising it, or anybody, or whoever you are, but you're looking at this property in Doncaster. It's a 6-bed, 6-bath. So we know it's either going to be an all-en-suite, or it might have one off-suite. And the income is 36,000 per year. So we know that Doncaster, being in Yorkshire, it should fall between 11 and 16%, based on numerous variables, many of which we might not even get time to discuss today. It's in Article 4. Not all Doncaster is, but this one is, and it was converted in 2020. So what are we assuming at that stage? What can we assume from a broad brush perspective? Well, to start with, 36,000. The first thing that I would look at would be 36,000 divided by 6 divided by 12. So it's £500 a month average for an ensuite room, which to me is about right for Doncaster. You can get a little bit more for the brand new ones, but a 2020 conversion, £500 a month. Yeah, okay, seems about right. It's in Article 4. So I'm assuming that it's in good condition, because the rents are, I would say, I'd probably rephrase that, maybe not high, but the rents are performing well for what it is and the age it is. There's a lot of HMOs in Doncaster that are a lot below 500. There are some at the 600 mark, the newer ones. So we know it's potentially got increased lending options because of the 6-bed, 6-bath. So I would look at it and say, all right, well, let's give it a 13.5% yield based on the sort of assumptions before I go and visit. And that falls within that 11 to 16, of around midpoint in that bracket. So the remote valuation expectation for that property would come in at 266,000 for a 6-bed, 6-bath HMO, 2020 converted, well managed, in Article 4 at 13.5% gross yield. So if you want to know how I calculated that, you can just simply do 36,000, divide that by 13.5, and then times it by 100, and you should get 266.666 or something along those lines. So that's where we're at. And as I said previously, that's 13.5. I missed the 0.5 off there. But as I said previously, we've arrived at a gross yield, but we didn't just go put a finger in the air for a gross yield at the beginning. We've made the assumptions based on those variables that we talked about at the beginning. So now I'm driving up to Doncaster thinking, or I've got a Zoom booked in with the landlord, but I'm thinking, okay, well, all being well, we should be around 266. So that's where we're at currently. Now, wasn't it annoying that laptop's black there because it ruins my font color, but I hope you can still see that one in the white. So digging deeper, going in. So imagine now this case study, we're at 266 for this property, or anything else that you're looking to appraise. So what do we need to dig deeper into? So the running costs, the compliance, the Article 4 situation, the managing agent, historical occupancy, the tenant and lease type, all of these things now come into play. And this is where specialisms come in, because if you took a residential estate agent, they might understand gross yields, they might understand the condition of the property, they might even understand the planning class use, but we're really diving in now because we need to see, well, is this going to work from a net perspective? Is it going to hit the right amount of returns? And critically, is it, as a tenanted HMO, are the tenants an asset or are the tenants a liability? And that's one of the things that I always try and establish. And we know one or the other will affect value greatly. So digging a little bit deeper. So big thing at the moment, gas and electricity. Some landlords are on quite high tariffs, and they look a bit expensive, and you get a feel for the averages of what they should be per property. So we may be saying, look, to take this to market. And again, this is what I was saying about preparing for all of these tips. If you're looking at buying a HMO, then have a think about gas and electricity and trying to get the best deal. If you currently own them, even if you're just optimizing your gas, electricity, and your maintenance and things for now, if you're taking it to sale, you're taking a business to sale, and you wouldn't take a business to sale. I've never sold a business, but people that I know who have said that you've got to start cutting out expenses out of that business to make it look as healthy as possible. So all those little coffees and all those little things that you're doing for that business, when you take that to the business, that to market to get the best value for your business, you're optimizing absolutely everything for the health of the business. So we are looking at that now as a deep dive with every HMO value. We're starting to establish the annual maintenance costs. Where that comes into play, most attentive landlords and most attentive managing agents, to keep the good rents that we're achieving on the broad brush, they will need to be annual maintenance to a decent standard. Otherwise, we'll see a drop off in the bottom point there, the voids, and we wouldn't see the rents achieving that we are achieving when we get the rent statements in. But it comes into situations where there might be a rent-to-rent contract on that property. Well, a rent-to-rent contract, they are there to skim the difference. They're not there to put money into maintenance. So you tend to find at the back end of a rent-to-rent contract, excuse me, for example, the next buyer coming in, or when that landlord takes ownership of the property, there's a bit of a maintenance bubble that's being built. We're looking at council tax. Thanks to our friends Wendy and Darren, it's less of an issue. But we still look at the council tax situation of each property. We don't have the VOA individual banding concerns that we used to, but it's definitely on a running cost to look at a variable. Cleaners, gardeners, voids, all of these things. We give our landlords full spreadsheet with all of these up to itemize, and then obviously we get rent statements. And because if there's any anomalies in there, what I'm going to have to do is add a percentage on the gross yield, reduce the asking price, because there's a fair balance that the investor's going to come in and pay. So if you don't want to reduce your asking price and have that fair balance achieved, well, optimize these things before sale, and then you'll achieve a higher selling price. The compliance of a HMO is massive. So going back to what I was saying about tenancies being an asset or a liability, or a HMO being, to be sold as a business. So first of all, licensed. We know if it's a license. Someone put a quote on one of the forums the other day saying you can never actually buy a licensed HMO. And what they were saying is that obviously licenses aren't transferable. But what a license does give you is, it's been inspected and it's at a certain standard and it meets the local licensing requirements. However, you've still got to apply for a new one when you purchase any HMO. All of the tenancy checks, all of the deposits, all of these things, the fire risk assessments, the gas safety, the planning matches the license, the number of people in there matches the planning. All of that really goes into, remove any of those and we're decreasing saleability. And if you decrease saleability by a couple of percentage points, then you're reducing value. So, as somebody that's appraising it, I've got to make sure that I'm looking at all of this. But even you setting up a HMO and running it and optimizing it, making sure if these are all in place constantly, and all of a sudden you've got a £20,000 vet bill for your horse and you need to suddenly sell your HMO, you come to me and I can sell it to you fairly quickly because it's compliant and it's all in place. You fall out with your JV partner, or you get a down val that you weren't expecting and it triggers a sale that you didn't really know that was coming. Picking all these off on an ongoing basis is it's much better to maintain that high saleability. So is Article 4 in place? Therefore, is there a lawful development certificate? Has a property lawfully been converted from C3 to C4? Property filter is my go-to for a searching. I mean, it's changed things for me in terms of typing a postcode in, dropping down, picking the property, and then you just click the Article 4 map on the side. It's got search by, I don't even know what the other tips are, but you click Article 4 and it comes up in purple and tells you if it's an Article 4 area. Then you reverse engineering, thinking, well, has it been lawfully converted? It also gives me an indication of the saturation, and that comes from a tenancy perspective, but also the number of developers operating. Graham talked before about Derby. Article 4 is just going to come in. So March next year, Article 4 is coming in. Supply and demand of tenants is already at a slight tipping point. Weaker HMOs are starting to sort of struggle. Better managed and more attentive managing agents and better HMOs and better amenities are still working. But every man and his dog is now trying to get C3 to C4 conversions in and finished with 3 or more tenants in place before March next year. So that creates a false number of HMO rooms hitting the market. So, I'm looking at the future Article 4 introduction in a lot of these areas, saying, oh, there isn't one now, so feel free to go and develop. But who else is going to develop? Who else is using property filter to skirt around the Article 4 sort of zones and clip the edges? Because for me as a valuer and for everybody else, looking at valuations, they're also considering these factors of sustainability and to lock in another USP or not. Managing agents. So yeah, the costs of them, the hidden costs, what the managing agent is actually costing, it really affects the bottom line. The service. I've had managing agents in the past stop a deal because I've sold a HMO, an investor goes to meet the managing agent and they're just really poor at getting back to them, or they're not very confident on HMOs, or they try and get them. The amount of times they say, oh, I don't really do HMOs, we don't really like this property, we wish it was a buy to let. That is going to affect the saleability. If you've got an agent like that and you want to try and sell a property and they're responsible for access and notifying tenants and tenant harmony, necessarily might not necessarily affect me saying, well, this is no longer worth 300 grand, but it's going to affect anyone paying 300 grand and feeling confident to actually go through and actually purchase the property. So, making sure that agent that's in place is transferable. Make sure that all potential issues are resolved, and you've got a management structure in place that a new buyer can come in confidently and go, yeah, I'll inherit that, because they're the babysitter. You as the seller, and us, we're the midwife. You're pregnant, we're the midwife. We deliver the HMO to the new person, but then the managing agent is they're the babysitter. They're looking after that property. So it needs to be transferable, and they need to be on board with understanding their position is adding value to this overall experience as well between seller and new buyer. and then tenant and lease type. So who's in that property? So we've talked about size, beds, income, but would an LHA tenant, more vulnerable tenant, a little bit less settled, a little bit more churn, fluctuating, leaving the property, or would local, more stable working tenants? Do professional tenants change value? I really don't like putting it in kind of quotation marks, because what's the difference between working and professional? It's not that different in terms of actual people, but sometimes if you've got a professional mindset of an investor, someone that they went to a certain university, or they're a postgrad, or they went to some, and if you've got a house full of people that were them 20 years prior, and they understand the tenant type and they can relate to them, it does help saleability. So the student should be on there as well, because student, same again, student properties tend to appeal to, you get a lot of ex students of those areas that they might have gone to Bristol University themselves, now they live in London, they've got some spare money, and their go-to place to buy a HMO would be a Bristol student HMO, just because they understand it. So tenant. And then moving on to things that can add or decrease value, long lease, social housing, ranging from Serco MEAs right the way up to bespoke, CPI linked long lease with registered providers. Who's paying? How does that affect loan to value, interest rates? How does that affect getting vacant possession? How does it affect your bottom line in terms of your running costs, your insurance costs? So this is constantly affecting the value and the saleability, and who we're aiming that property at. Service accommodation is a difficult one. There isn't really the kind of the marketplace on a sales. So if we come across, sometimes we come across HMOs where, to increase cash flow, the landlord's just gone, oh, we've got people coming in, short term, and we've boosted our monthly returns. But from a buyer's perspective, it's quite difficult for them to relate to that. It seems too much work, and these hands-off buyers that want to buy a tenant HMO don't quite often align with it. A holiday let is a different thing, but an SA sort of contractor and stuff, it's quite difficult to add value for that. And hate to say it, but a rent-to-rent contract will always devalue a HMO. Somebody else is taking a portion of the profit, so it's going to obviously devalue it from a net or a net ROI perspective. So having that out of the way before we sell. I've got one that I'm just about to launch next week. It's taken us 6 months to get a rent-to-rent contract out and to get the tenancies under the landlord's control. And now we can increase the value and take it to the market. So going back to our case study, we've added in some extra variables now. So we were around here, weren't we? So it was converted in 2022. We've now established that they are working tenants. Happy days. They're all working. They're all paying well. The running costs, we've gone in and they're all optimized. They're on the best tariffs that they can be. Everything is shape in terms of providing the best net returns. All fully compliant. Everything's in place. If they're in Article 4 and the landlord is prepared and got their lawful development certificate, so we can lawfully say that this conversion has taken place properly. Brilliant managing agent. Happy to meet the new buyer, sit down with them, happy to talk about their services. I've been there, I've inspected the property, it's really good. And therefore the saleability is high. So I can now say, well, actually, Mr. Selling Landlord or Mrs. Selling Landlord, I was driving up the M1 and I thought it would be 13.5% gross, but based on the deep dive, I'm happy to go at 12.5% gross yield now, because I feel that the lenders would support it. I feel that the buyer market would support it, and therefore the property's jumped up by 22 grand in value, thanks to having all of these things in place. So that's quite a nice thing to say to landlords when they've prepared things and they've optimized things. And the beauty of this, it's the same net return. So if I took these two properties side by side, one of them at 266 at 13.5, if I took next door out at 288, which one would actually give you more money in your back pocket? Probably in this case, the one with the lower gross yield, because everything's optimized. If it's what I said before, the higher the gross yield isn't always, the higher net returns, and the buyers a lot of our buyers, they want to pay more money for quality because it's an ROI attached. They're making an investment on every penny they spend. It's not like spending 266 or 288 on a family home or on a flip deal where the cheaper you buy it, the more margin you're building in. With HMOs, the cheaper you buy the HMO, usually the more inherent problems there are. So the buyers want to pay good money for quality HMOs. And our job when we onboard our clients, our buying clients, is to make them understand that look, it's so much more worthwhile paying 288 for this HMO than paying 266 for the 13.5 one, because you've got to go in and you've got to improve stuff. So yeah, I hope that it kind of all makes sense on that side. And taking that the opposite way, starting from the running costs here, if I said, okay, well, the gas and electricity, bloody hell, the 450 quid joint gas and electricity, that's pretty high. And I've just found out that the tenants' deposits aren't protected. And I found out that the landlord hasn't got lawful development certificate, so that needs to be applied for. It's a bit of a worry. And I've just found out that it's self-managed, so there isn't a managing agent. So the new buyer has got to go off and find a managing agent. And I went there and I couldn't get access to all the rooms, but what I could see was a messy communal area. And there was a couple of broken chairs. It all looked a bit kind of not looked after. So all of a sudden the saleability becomes medium. And I'm saying, actually, look, you're at 14% gross yield. So you've gone down by a potential 38,000 grand from where you should be with a fully optimized one. And the same thing again, the buyer isn't better off paying 250 for that one because they've got a lot of effort to go in, and they might not even get a mortgage because they're asking for lawful development certificates now. So irrespective of, and the rents at 36 grand might have come with a few voids that they haven't told us about because tenants are leaving because it's not that harmonious and a happier house. So the opposite is true. So I'm talking about a sales value of 250, 266 or 288, but you can apply that to looking at yourself appraising properties that you're going to buy. And you can apply this if you're just a HMO landlord watching today, thinking, oh, well, actually, yeah, that's a good point. I currently self-manage. Let me start thinking about how can that be transferred, or shit, I didn't even know what a lawful development certificate was, So you can keep that increased intrinsic value locked in on your property at whatever stage you're at. So quickly, just other points to consider: the lending level. So what the banks say it's worth is a massive one for us. So I'm gathering that information as much as possible. The buyer type. So who's the exit? Is it an overseas buyer? Is it an investment fund? Is it a mum and dad buying for their student son? Whatever it is. Cost of lending. So is it a traditional HMO with standard tenants where we're going to get a 5-ish% yield at interest rate? Or has it got a specialist leased in place on that property where they're going to be a 7.9% interest rate, which I've seen recently? The costs of that lending, the arrangement fees, the loan to value, all of that affects ultimately what someone's going to pay for it and what their ROIs are. And it goes without saying, the quicker that you want to sell. So if you do have a knee-jerk sale because you've not prepared properly and things aren't accurate, or you've rushed into something, or you didn't fully understand your GDVs at the beginning and you've over leveraged and you think, shit, I've just got to sell this to sort of balance the books. If you sell in a sort of fast time frame, if you're urgent and desperate to sell, something's got to give. And with property investment or any property purchase, if you add haste and speed into it, then usually value goes down because somebody's getting you off the hook. And then to finish, just to reiterate really what we were saying previously. So why is all this important to you? So if you fit into any of these categories, really, new to HMOs, just absorbing info to think about going into them, your own optimization, planning for your future exit, because you're going to sell, right? You're not going to just pass these on to your kids forever and ever. You buy well, you manage it, you optimize it, and then you sell well. That is the bit. And the sell well, that's my job, to make sure that you're all thinking about that. It can help your valuation packs, and it can also help your investment packs when you want to raise investment. You understand all of these variables more, and you're factoring them in. That gives more confidence to people that you're trying to borrow money off, including the banks, including private investors. You get better GDV estimates. So you understanding what we've just gone through, you're going to arrive at a clearer GDV without having to sort of put in too much guesswork. So when you're going on Property Filter and appraising properties, if you're closer on your GDV, then you're in a much better place to start with, and you're able to ask the right questions to selling agents, to people that maybe wanted to work with you. You're just understanding the valuation and what makes the HMO worth what it's worth. And if you do all of those, that's on any property, you're going to increase that value. Like we said, on the small modest six bed, the range was a 38 grand difference, and that was basically, they're still fairly okay HMOs within that 38 grand range. Take it too far on the other way and you hit the bricks and mortar baseline. If it's a really bad HMO, the range could be 100 grand just on a HMO that's a six bed in Doncaster at 36 grand a year. So it really does increase and hold your value of your assets, and that's obviously better for your equity, better for your exit, and better for everything. So I think we've arrived at the Q&A. So I hope everyone enjoyed that.
Yeah, Richard, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. It was really thorough and how do you say, exhaustive. So yeah, thanks a lot for that. So if you want, I go through the questions and pass to you. Is that okay? Like this?
Yeah, of course.
You can focus on. So there are questions around the gross yield, but I think we are sorted now. And Kate was asking, once the HMO is valued and prepared for sale, how long on average will it take for the property to sell? And the question behind the question here is really how well HMOs are selling in the current market.
Yeah, good question. Kate, do you have a particular location in mind that you want me to hone in on, or do you want me to just cover?
I think Kate is Milton Keynes and
Milton
Hi
Keynes
there.
and Manchester.
Okay.
Hi there. I used to be in Milton Keynes, I'm well remembered. I actually I'm based in Greater Manchester now, in Wigan, exactly.
Okay. So Wigan will sell currently better than Milton Keynes. The difficulty at the moment in the marketplace has been the cost of lending at the moment, and buyers are waiting for the base rate to go down because we're so close to a potential change, that anything I'd say in the southeast or in an area where the yield is around 10 or 11% in a non-student or non-very active area, they're the slowest to sell right now. So if you were looking to sell a property in Milton Keynes, I would expect to try and achieve, I don't know, 10 to 11% gross yield for you, depending on what it was. On that gross yield, you've then got to think, well, let's have a look at all of those running costs. And the biggest thing is going to be a 400 grand property or whatever it's going to be. It's the cost of lending. The mortgage is going to be half the income at the moment. So that is a massive cost to take out. So the margins don't quite work. In Wigan, if we're up at 13, 14% gross yield and the purchase prices are a lot lower and it's more accessible, there's a little bit more of a margin for buyers to still operate and to still come in and purchase with a higher gross yield. So the Wigan would be more saleable now. If you had a Wigan HMO and a Milton Keynes one to sell to give me, I would say launch the Wigan one the week of September when the kids go back, and you should be fine. A fairly attractive gross yield that's suitable for Wigan. A Milton Keynes one, I'd probably sit and wait for another year, and I think that's the difference. We're struggling with places like Northampton, Rushden, any of these sort of fairly higher value areas up the M1, Swindon, that they're not high premium southeast, where the buyer, when I talked before about the buyer mindset, where the buyer would go, well, I don't care about gross yield because my asset's going up 50 grand a year because it's in central London. It's that middle, so it's not a very high northern gross yield, and it's not as the premium southeast where the bricks and mortars going up exponentially. So that's the toughest markets at the moment, which it only tough because of the interest rates and the lending market. So I'd wait for Milton Keynes, whereas Wigan, because the lower entry price and the higher yield, you're not too bad at the moment.
Thank you.
Sorry, looking for the mute button. Thanks so much. Darren's asking, in the context of the valuation and the gross yield you were giving, how does that compare basically with bank valuations, for commercial valuations, and how does that work?
Yeah, so it's always, everywhere I go, one of the first questions I ask every landlord is, what did you refinance this at, or what lending have you achieved on this at what level? So I'm keeping a mental note constantly of where the banks are lending at, and that very much plays into what I'm valuing the properties at. So, for example, in Peterborough, 6-bed all en suite, you'd refinance just above the 400 grand. We'd be selling it for probably 10 grand more than that. So it's very, very consistent with the lending level. In Derby, they're still financing at Shawbrook at 11% gross yield equivalent for experienced investors, but the sales market is probably 0.5, 0.6% higher than that. So to get them out the door, because the buyers aren't seeing the same value as Shawbrook at the moment, there's a little bit of an anomaly. But all of these areas, as I think it cropped up a few times on the slides, that I need to know what the banks are going to pay. It isn't a case. What a lot of people do is assume that a unicorn buyer will get them off the hook with any HMO. And haven't you got a cash buyer from Hong Kong that will pay 10% gross yield and things like that? And I'm looking at the consistency in the market and making sure every landlord understands the bulk of the buyer base. That we had a unicorn buyer come to us in Portsmouth last week, and cash buyer, they bought 2 properties from us. Wow, amazing. We've got several unicorn buyers that pop up every now and then, but you can't build a business based on random sales to random people that pop up the market. We're looking at the consistency. So, and that is underpinned by the bank confidence. The opposite of that as well is from experiences, and just keep my ear to the ground. I've had another guy who works inside Shawbrook approached me on LinkedIn last night, actually, for a chit chat. So I'm constantly trying to talk to the lenders. Lenders close their book in certain areas. So Paragon have been doing nil valuations in Barnsley for the last 6 months, and they'll just say, look, we've had enough. So we're steering the buyers and we're steering the people to the right lending options, which comes into speaking to the best brokers that know about this as well and specialize in it for your own mortgages as well.
Awesome, thank you. You had the map with the different yields. Just to confirm to everyone, so these are your valuation yields, not the bank's yields, yeah?
Yeah, they're mine, but obviously what the banks are saying is factored
I didn't
in.
mean Richard, like yours. I mean like sales yields rather than refinance yields.
Correct. Yeah. And you will find that the refinance yield and the GDV yield will slot into that, to be honest. Yeah.
Okay.
But they're not always the same in different areas.
Okay, awesome. Someone was making the comment, wondering what were the yields in East Anglia, just so you know for the next one.
Did you say Istanbul then?
East Anglia.
Say that way. I've never been.
I'm actually in Istanbul just now, but yeah, East Anglia is missing from the from the map. Someone was asking.
It is just based on volume. Somewhere like Norwich, I mean, Ipswich could be 12s, 13s, and a little bit higher. There's obviously a lot of rural areas, but a good Norwich, you've got good quality student properties, sub 10. So I would say if you apply East Anglia would be comparable to, your Milton Keyneses and your sort of some of your Essex areas if it's decent Norwich, and then you can start to drift up into your sort of Midland yields for Ipswich.
Awesome. Is Buxton the same as Derby?
No, Buxton is a lot higher at the moment than Derby. Buxton would be probably 13% gross yield for something decent. Derby would be at 11.5% gross yield for something decent as a straight shootout. You can be at 13% in Derby. I mean, I would value a property in Derby at 13% if it was, say, a 5-bed, 2-bath, average income. It wasn't one of these nice brand new ones. But if that property, you cut that and put it in Buxton, then Buxton might be 14% sort of thing. So there's a bit of a, there's a higher yield in Buxton.
And just to be super clear to everyone, when you said, it's a lot higher in Buxton, the yield is higher, therefore the valuation is lower. Yeah. So,
exactly. Yeah.
People get mixed up. Sarah was saying,
excuse me.
So questions around the yield on the map again. So are these numbers what the valuers use? And I think we clarified that. How do you Have you got more specifics or resources, Richard? I don't know if you have like some ebook of some sort. I don't know about costs. You know, like people are interested in cost and running costs and benchmarks. What to what to expect.
I'm happy for you. If you want to scan that QR code and send me, my email will come through on that QR code. If you want to send me an email, whoever, and ask if you say, look, I want to try and establish the running costs on a 5-bed in so and so. I will have examples, and I will have a kind of some financial sheets that we've appraised where I can show you the running costs of different styles of HMOs in different areas for an average. So I'm very happy. I don't have anything as a anything to sort of upsell or charge for, but I'm just happy to do it as a follow up. If you give me a couple of days after, drop me an email. Yeah.
Thanks a lot for that. Sarah was asking, could you elaborate on the council tax banding? I think it was the single banding and then it being overturned.
Yeah, so a few years ago, the Valuations Office, the VOA, started trying to charge, or they did start to charge individual council tax per room. If that room, not always actually, I found a lot of non-ensuite rooms that were banded, but they wanted to try and charge multiple council tax per, and they class a room as a unit, therefore they'd apply individual council tax. Went to the High Court, it was overturned. Late 2022, wasn't it? About a year ago now. So that now means that each HMO, we're back to single council tax. That you get some with business rates and stuff, the larger ones, but basically the worry over individual banding has gone. Having said that, last week I went to a property. This week I went to a property where I said to this was in Portsmouth, and I said to the landlord, look, your rent seemed quite low for the average. And I was a little bit worried about that. And he said, look, we've still got the legacy of tenants that were paying their own individual council tax. So we had to reduce our, So even though the council tax banding situation's changed, they made a decision not to increase the rents because they wanted to keep the same 6 tenants in the house. So the tenants have been there for ages, but they're all paying probably 50 quid a month less than they should be because they chipped in for their own council tax. So, things like that are still there as a legacy of it. So that just formed part of my valuation. Yeah.
Lots of very good feedback, Richard, in the chat. Alistair is asking, would upgrading to solar and heat pump be part of optimizing the strategy for a sale?
Yeah. So we do get a lot of developers. So we do a lot of this photograph that you can see on the screen now. This is a developer that we work with where they create HMOs to flip because it's a really good strategy. And there's a few well-known developers that do a kind of, develop 3, but every 3rd property they'll flip on because it moves money around. You're not leaving the 25-30% in, and it just frees up the capital. And also selling a flip will give you that sold comparable at the right level. So your future refinances are a little bit more, there's a comp for you, which is good. And a lot of those developers are now looking at, acoustics, they're looking at, heat pumps, they're looking at, energy renewal systems, heat renewal systems, they're looking at solar. And a lot of that is just pulling back a couple of margins of percentages away that we're slipping up with energy costs and with interest rates and for landlords. So the more that you can do at development stage, doesn't make too much sense to retrofit them, but on development stage, if you can build in and optimize, then we can transfer that to a buyer and say, look, and this isn't apples for apples. This is a particularly high-end product where you're going to be future-proofed, you're going to be optimized, your running costs are going to be so much lower, the house stays warm naturally, all the heat from the bathrooms goes around into the, all that kind of stuff. It increases saleability, if nothing else. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. I would have thought it could increase some, the complexity, having plans and things, and it's more things that could fail. How do you do the due diligence on this? Is it another category that these things work and well maintained?
Yeah, and more on the compliance and more on the certification and the guarantees and the warranties, but I haven't really seen it from standard developers, to be honest. There's a few developers that are fairly prolific that have got to the point where their build teams are trusted enough to go that little extra mile. So yeah, I think it tends to be the more experienced HMO developers that are doing fairly good volume are now really looking at, because it becomes quite difficult once you've got this portfolio of brand new HMOs. It's quite highly leveraged. The margins,
Yeah.
you know, that I do a lot of video content with a lot of developers. You know, so George Ball, but if you know George Ball from Derby, people like that.
He's
And
one
he
of the
said, look,
first Property Filter member, yeah, from 2 years ago, yeah.
yeah, so they start to turn and they develop and then they become owners and they look at it and it's the margins. So when you're developing his new ones now, he's developing, focusing on those little percentages. It just comes through experience because, you know, it isn't just a case of whacking a kitchen in, putting a few ensuites in and expecting it to be producing the same net as something that's really planned out and thought out.
Yeah, awesome. Hugh is asking, have you got comments on student HMOs in Article 4 area in Sheffield?
Well, it would be a couple of percentage lower than the average. And what you tend to find, if you've got a property that you're appraising or you want to do a little report for you, but there's normally good comparables as well for student properties, because in most areas, the student HMOs tend to be in the older part of town, in the higher bricks and mortar areas. There's consistent sold comps, which drives up that total appreciation as well. So your Sheffields, Chesters, Leeds, any of those areas, your gross yield becomes an equal factor as the bricks and mortar and as the longevity of the asset, if you like, from that point of view. So there, it will be a couple of percent lower than the average for Sheffield, at least. Yield lower, price higher.
Yeah. LD is asking, I've got a 8-bed 8-kitchen HMO to sell in Doncaster in DN1. Gross income is 46K. What will be the valuation? I think there's a lot of stuff to look at. What's the best way, by the way, for people if they've got properties to buy and sell to reach
I think so. Again, on the links in that one, I think there's a landlord sell your HMO, and it gives me that first initial form that I mentioned, where you go through, you fill in a few boxes, and it gives me the broad brush. But the Doncaster example is really good to use because we've just worked out a 6-bed, good or bad. So we've just been told there's an 8-bed all en suite. So already, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to say, okay, maybe slightly better economies of scale. We're also sui generis planning application. So that means therefore we can access full commercial lending. You know, we've got usually it could be a newer property because it's just been developed. So then DN1, you know, Article 4. So we were at 13.5. So already with the sui generis larger property, I'll be at worst 13, and we might creep below to 12.5, depending if it's brand new. We could be at 13. So it's going to be a better yield than the 6-bed C4 equivalent already. So that's a really good one to sort of flag up as to prove the concept, really.
Awesome. Yeah. I is asking, you okay with time, Richard? You okay to stay for a bit?
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't realize we overrun quite a bit already, but questions are interesting. Fires was saying GDV will be better in Article 4 areas, right?
Yeah, there's usually some good solid comparable data for the lenders. The lenders understand Article 4s, the buyers, the premium. Usually Article 4 areas, you know, Article 4, and they've also been implemented for a reason as well. So usually tend to find it's in the more populous tenant areas. And it caps supply and demand, and it caps. So as a rule of thumb, you'd expect a premium in an Article 4 area. Not always, but as a rule of thumb.
Yeah. Okay. I think Patrick's had a different, similar type of questions. RP had a similar type of questions around Article 4 area coming into Derby, and the value will be.
But that's not going to. So what we're saying about valuations, Derby's going to go down before it goes up because, you know, it was at that kind of point where people were rushing in and it became the new Doncaster and everybody's developing there. Then you're fighting for occupancy and you're dealing with, you know, kind of good with someone that you know very well about it, you know, and there's so at the moment, let's say Shawbrook at 11%, I'd expect them to start drifting. Even irrespective of Article 4 coming in, there's going to be more properties coming on the market. The minute Article 4 comes in, prices don't go down. I mean, sorry, the yields just don't go down straight away and prices go up. It's not like an instant guillotine coming down. There will be a settling down period where probably the prices will stop going down in Derby, and the saleability will gradually return. And I would imagine potentially somewhere like Derby, it'd take 12, 18 months, 24 months for the effect of the Article 4 increase to actually be shown. So it's not an instant sort of, situation where, but if you're in an established Article 4 area, where the market has settled and become more true and there's less developments, and the ones that do get through planning it, the councils pick them and said, yeah, okay, we'll have you, please. And the quality is improved and the supply and demand, then there is more value attached. And the last thing about Article 4 as well, it also depends on the sort of the size of the Article 4 area. So, for example, Barnsley, just the whole of Barnsley, including all of the villages, everywhere, the whole thing is Article 4. So that hasn't made a massive impact on valuations because there's everything's inside Article 4. But if you've got a very small patch or really a very popular area of a city just suddenly becomes Article 4, then it could be more valuable. Like, for example, Nottingham, there's little, you can spot the value changes in an established Article 4 kind of spot.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that. Question around valuations in Luton as well.
Yeah, Luton, similar to Milton Keynes. I've sold quite a few in Luton, probably 10s, 11s at the moment. Depending, as we said at the very beginning of this, your size and your bricks and mortar baseline plays a massive role anywhere down. It's the further down the M1 you go. But Luton, it should be in a good market between 10 and 11, that kind of area. You may be in a slightly less desirable market at the moment. So depending on what it was, you might creep a little bit above that. But I would wait to sell at something 11 or lower. That's what Luton should be selling out at.
Awesome. There's one last question from Darren, which is around the valuation and refinance. In your experience, you've seen how long do refinance take, and any comment on how long is there a 6 months rule for HMOs and commercial valuations?
So refinances, I think you need to speak to a finance broker on that, really, in terms of individual circumstances, how well you've prepared your own circumstances. I did a little bit of content with a broker a couple of weeks ago, and it was one of his gripes was, they want a mortgage tomorrow, but they're not fully prepared with all their statements, with all that, they might not have landlord experience. They might, there's too many variables personal, but I think on that one, I'd like to just defer to an actual mortgage broker if possible.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for today and taking the time to stay with us for, answering all the questions. Really appreciate it. There's been dozens and dozens of really good feedback and thank yous in the chat that I've skipped, and I've looked at the questions. So just wanted to be sure they were passed to you. Really appreciate it. Richard, do you have a closing sentiment for today?
No, I appreciate. Yeah, I mean, genuinely, obviously, when you asked me on, I use. I don't know if you can see who uses it, but I'm on there every day, mate, flicking around, looking at deals, and in particular for me, the Article 4 side. So I'm a big fan of you guys. So thanks for asking me on. And any follow-up questions, obviously, just bear with me in terms of reply times. But within a couple of days, I'll be able to get to them. So let me know any individual questions. I'm always happy to help.
Yeah, thanks so much, Richard. Really appreciate it.
Okay,
I didn't even realize you were addicted to it. So,
it's. I used to go on each individual council website and search Article 4 and things like that. And now, I mean, I know there's Article 4 maps.co.uk, whatever it is, but I just find all in one place on Property Filter. It's great.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah. So
really
and the ownership detail as well. When you can find out who owns it. That for me as well, because it just there's two quick things that have just made my time of appraising properties just so much quicker. So
As in if it's a company looking at
because quite often they're a company. We've got to input into our CRMs and get them structured and know who we're doing the AML on and stuff. So most of them are in a company, and it's just really easy to assess. So Property Filters, it's big thumbs up from me.
Well, fab, thank you very much. Means a lot. Thanks a lot, Rich. Cool. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Visit, visit the link, scan the QR code while you seal up from Richard, and do reach out to him if you need anything. In the meantime, visit propertyfilter.co.uk, log on to your Property Filter account, check out the deal blueprint. where you can define your goldmine area, engage with motivated sellers, assess properties in seconds, load your pipeline and make deals, have an endless supply of deals, join the top 1% and become a high achiever deal finder. I hope you enjoyed today's Deal Finder Corner like I did, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it. Thank you for the really cool feedback as well in the chat. Have a great day. Thanks a lot, Rich.
See you.